and welcome to Life Addictions, the Recovery and Prevention Show. My name is John Laus, and I am a certified recovery specialist here in the state of Florida. This show we talk about recovery and prevention, drugs, alcohol, food or nicotine, and some behavioral addictions like sex and love, gambling, internet gaming, spending, even procrastination and criminal addiction. On our past shows, we had some wonderful guests on, and we mainly talked about drug and alcohol recovery and prevention. Today, we have a very special guest, and we're going to broaden our horizons here. We have Richard Siegel. He's a licensed mental health counselor. He's also a Florida board-certified sex therapist. Richard, welcome to our show.
Thank you, John. Really pleasure to be here.
Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, well, as you said, I'm licensed by the state of Florida as a mental health counselor and certified as a sex therapist. That's a unique designation in that Florida is really the only state in the country that has, as part of our statutes that practice, that govern practice, to use the term sex therapist, one has to meet specific criteria.
Right.
I'm also certified by a national, international organization called ASECT, which also, it's not a government body, it's a private organization, but similar, I'd say, to the certification board in Florida, which certifies therapists and educators and sexual medicine practitioners.
Richard, or Ricky, right?
Sure.
Ricky, it's so good to have you on the show because we've had guest upon guest, and they're all experts in the drug and alcohol field. We had a nicotine specialist on, and I've always promised my audience that we broaden our horizons and bring out specialists in these other kinds of addictions. And now you see it as an addiction, sex therapy, or you get a little.
You mean sex addiction? Yeah. Let me tell you also before I answer that question that I did start my professional career in the chemical dependency treatment field.
Okay.
And left it for some of the reasons that we were bantering about before we started to roll.
Yeah.
It's grown as an industry, a treatment industry, that unfortunately is subject to the same kind of influences as any other corporate kind of growth industry,
right.
With a bottom line and a drive to make money. Basically, the treatment industry is a money-making one. Certain inpatient treatments nowadays are, patients are going away for 30 days and paying upwards to $2,500, $3,000 a day for. I'm not sure what. One of the things I want to talk about. So I see myself as kind of having this straddling the fence, having worked for a number of years in inpatient drug and alcohol treatment, was an addiction professional for a number of years, and then sort of leaving the field and getting into sexuality, and then finding myself really addressing, I should mention also with my brother, we've been working together for 20 years plus, on the sexuality issues in substance abuse and chemical dependency, that I think that broader picture of which so-called sex addiction, or what I would be more comfortable referring to as compulsive or impulsive sexual behaviors or behavior problems. Some folks say out of control sexual behavior.
Right.
But what subsumes this is that there's still a lot of confusion. The addiction treatment industry still by and large is not real comfortable going there and talking about sex. And we know that sex addiction has really blossomed, certainly fueled by the media, in large part. Many of these sex scandals that we'll undoubtedly talk about today, many of these folks are diagnosed by the media as sex addicts, whether or not they're forced into treatment or not. And I think we're missing an important point about treating psychopathology, which mental health and medical professionals are obligated to do, and rather fueling a growing industry with questionable success.
Richard Siegel is our special guest. He's a sex therapist, or better yet, a Florida board certified, sex therapist.
Sure.
Now, Ricky, tell us a little bit about, you deal with patients with, your sex therapy, sexual relationships, problems in all areas and stages of life. What do you see? What's the most prevalent thing that's out there? There's always trends, like in drugs and alcohol. It's now prescription pills.
Right.
What is it in the field that you practice in? I'm guessing that the internet has a huge hand in it.
Well, I assume you're alluding to internet pornography and folks getting into compulsive problems with that.
You know, I've got a new iPhone, and my Siri, I can ask it for an escort.
Technology,
and it gives me an escort.
Technology's always led the way and expanded from previous whatever that level was. I mean, you know, it's hard to think of 900 phone sex lines from when we were kids as cyber sex or techno sex, but at the time it was, and I'm sure that there were people who lost their relationships over huge phone bills and were fired from jobs for talking on phone sex lines at work, and so while the internet has certainly just exploded this, I don't think it's really pushed what too many folks are, in my opinion, kind of hyperbolically calling an epidemic of porn addiction, and you know, I think it's a little histrionic to call porn online the new crack, as this kind of instant, one single exposure hook, and you know, again, we're looking at the object rather than the person's decision making. The choices around that object.
Right. You know, and that's what it all boils down to, isn't it? It's
in my opinion, yeah.
Yeah. It's, what is it? The underlying causes. I mean, this internet, this, you know, escort, this affair, those are just symptoms.
You've nailed my approach to all these kinds of problems. I would prefer to look at the sexual behavior, whether it's compulsive self-pleasuring or compulsive cheating, as symptomatic.
Right.
And my job as a psychotherapist and a sex therapist. And if it's a sexological problem, I think sex therapists are the best trained people to address it.
Yeah.
But I'm a psychotherapist first, and I'm obliged to pinpoint, to do a differential diagnosis and find out if a compulsive behavior is the result of an anxiety disorder. Someone is afraid or trying to self-medicate, something along the lines of an OCD, where people have basically faulty mechanisms of self-soothing. Or it could be depression. I mean, we know, and everybody who shows up in treatment better be depressed. I'd worry about something more severe if someone was in treatment all happy and, you know, unless they were just so relieved to be out of the mess that they were in. So depression's common link. There could be more challenging things for psychotherapists, like personality disorders that are very highly, I'll say, co-occurring with a lot of substance abuse disorders.
You know, we have a lot of viewers that are watching, and a lot of viewers are probably saying, well, I might know somebody, or I might not know somebody that might have a, you know, sexual addiction or something like that. But some of the things you mentioned are very identifiable. Anxiety, depression, OCD. I've hung out with some friends this past weekend from Philly, and one of my friends had a little slight OCD problem. But how does some of those things manifest into sexual stuff that they do, as opposed to drugs or alcohol, or it might be intertwined, but sexually speaking, how does that anxiety, depression, maybe OCD kind of, you know, tunnel itself into the sexual outlets that some people get with marriages and infidelity and that kind of thing?
Of course, there's lots of reasons why folks cheat, and we know, you know, for better.
But you're saying it's because of these anxiety, depression, OCD?
Well, it could also be relationship problems. Now, that's not to justify or excuse cheating by any stretch, but at the end of the day, cheating is a betrayal. It's a violation of a negotiated, however, I'm not saying that we go into marriage with a necessarily complete contract. Very often people go into marriage like going into business and signing a blank contract and say, we'll fill it in as we go along. But there's clearly a betrayal when someone steps out. But to say that the reason for that is an addiction, well, we know, again, culturally and in the media too often, I think one of the biggest and first complaints is that we've seen too often the classic mea culpa. It's not my fault. I have a disease. I'm not a bad person. You know, look, my wife is still standing by my side, and she's got that face, you know, and I'm going to treatment because I'm not a bad person. I have this disease, and you know that
Is it really just an impulse that they just let go with? And
Impulse control disorders is a category that could explain a lot of these behaviors. Everybody knows from the angel and devil scenarios that since we're little kids, you know, there's Freud would describe it in terms of id and superego conflicts. You know, you're walking in the mall, you see the Haagen-Dazs stand, and the devil's always first on the scene that yells in peanut butter chocolate, right? And then for some reason, the angel's always late. You notice that? The angel says, "Oh no, you've been thinking about your butt, whatever." And then the devil typically runs the other shoulder, kicks the angel off, or at least that's what it was like in Bugs Bunny.
Right.
And then you go get the ice cream. So there's the impulse control disorder is when someone is really just kind of incapable of, well, now I have to go to a bigger picture of what's mental health and what are, you know, psychologically healthy people look like. Delay of gratification, we know that's a thread through all of addiction. And frustration tolerance, which could explain why people develop that go-to coping mechanism.
It's sort of like a hedonistic inner...
I would go with that as well. Sure. One of the newer medical models, and you know, I really have to take issue with that concept of a disease, addiction as a disease, because I think people conveniently drop the model part of that disease model for explaining addiction, and we've just kind of said, see, it's a disease, we know that, but this model of addiction now, a lot of physicians, addictionologists, self-identified addictionologists, are using neurotransmitter dysregulation, and that relates to pleasure and reward and reinforcement and decision making ultimately. So I have to say, in my humble opinion, I'm not a physician or a neurologist, but I do think it's kind of like the intelligent design version of, you know, rather than call it creationism, call it intelligent design. And so instead of addiction, we're going to identify neurotransmitter dysregulation, and we're already in a mess with trying to explain depression and anxiety and mood disorders as just having one little chemical in the brain out of balance, and just take a pill and you're back in balance and you're good to go. But again, that's no cure either.
Well, it really is everything that goes on in between the ears on this head as opposed to anything else. And we've got so much more to cover. We're going to take a short break. Please watch this commercial on our great product, the Recovery Pod, and we'll be right back. Imagine a world without addictions.
I lost my father.
I lost my best friend.
Today, the addiction rate in the country has reached epidemic proportions. It seemed that only a miracle could stop addictions. But instead of a miracle, we are given the Recovery Pod.
Within a short period of time, a person listening to the Recovery Pod can make a shift out of addiction.
I was addicted to alcohol. I was addicted to Oxycontin.
I was addicted.
The Recovery Pod can effectively reduce addiction in our nation. It is for individuals, institutions, rehabilitation centers, insurance providers, and federal, state, and local governmental agencies.
After years in recovery, it still works for me. And now, the Recovery Pod can work for you.
We need to make absolutely certain that every American with an addiction problem can have access to the Recovery Pod as part of their treatment.
Because freedom isn't free if you're addicted. The Recovery Pod. Get it now.
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 The Recovery Pod. Get it now. Hi, and welcome back to our show, Life Addictions, the Recovery and Prevention Show. Richard Siegel is our special guest. He's a Florida board-certified sex therapist, and we just saw a commercial on our product called the Recovery Pod. And we have one on drugs and alcohol, and soon, hopefully, we're going to have one on sex and love addiction, as long as some of the other behavioral and addictions like that. What do you think about a product like that?
I did check it out on your website, and I got to say, I truly like the concept. It fits very much in line with my approach to psychotherapy, which is typically a cognitive behavioral approach as we often describe sex therapy, a cognitive behavioral modality with a kind of a psychodynamic underpinning. I very, very often am encouraging my patients. I remind them that when we're in therapy, it's an hour a week or 2 hours a week. They're with themselves 24/7. And so I'm a huge advocate of that concept of developing in the patient or the client the idea of just like the angel and the devil, an on the shoulder, in the ear, self-therapist, self-coach kind of. This fits the bill perfectly because it's literally an in the ears, 24/7 voice of positive reassurance, affirmation, all those things that people struggle with. And it's always the in-between the sessions that the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
You know, and it really goes right to the bloodstream as, you know, you're listening to it. It's immediate. And, you know, one of the reasons I developed this and have it outlined for the other addictions is I really do believe that if you're addicted to one, you're probably addicted to several. And I know a lot of times in my life, even as an early teen, I became addicted to things. And I weaved in and out throughout my whole life. And, you know, and finally decided to dedicate my life to this and to become an expert in the field and to bring other people like yourself here to talk about, you know, your experiences and how you develop your different modalities to help people out of this. And if I would have had this earlier in life, it would have been a gem. It's just another tool in the toolbox. And if you're listening out there, we have the drug and alcohol one available. If you have maybe a family member, a coworker, or somebody you know, please, we'll have one more commercial at the end of the show. But please write down a number or give us a call and order one. It's under $100, and it would make a great Christmas gift for maybe somebody you know. There's so much more to cover here in your field. Tell us a little bit more. You know, we talked about some of the problems and some of the symptoms. What are some of the other tools in the toolbox that you have your clients do? Obviously, there's 12-step programs. I've been doing myself, SLAA meetings for sex and love addiction. What are some of the other, like, you know, those tools that you stop, you tell a person to say, if you're feeling this way, here's what you can do. Give us some, like, gems that maybe somebody that's watching. And here's another thing, I believe a lot of people have this.
Okay, again, I would struggle to wrap my head around what this is.
Sort of like a sexual addiction. You know, you see Kane out there, you've seen different people that are married, you know, they have this contract or this bond with somebody, whether it's Tiger Woods or whether it's whoever we see.
Okay, so if we talk specifically about infidelity, right? I truly struggle to see how that could possibly be symptomatic of an addiction in the same way. I mean, I would sooner go along with, I treated a patient who was a compulsive masturbator who was running about 25-30 times a day. We're talking about...
running like as in...
No, I mean like...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like doing self-harm, like clearly kind of this was a mentally ill young man that was obviously not getting much else done. You want to talk about an unmanageable and dysfunctional life, averaging 10, 12, 14 hours a day online and causing self-harm with an out-of-control compulsive disorder.
So that was extreme.
Now, I've had other guys come to my practice, and guys call me up and say, I need to come in and schedule an appointment because I'm a sex addict, and I come to find out that they're self-pleasuring once or twice a week. And for some reason they, well, sometimes it's, you know, could be religious messages or guilt or lots of reasons. They've internalized this idea that there's something pathological about what most professionals would consider certainly normal, developmentally normal behavior. But if somebody does something once a year and it causes, you know, in the parlance of recovery, it causes dysfunction and unmanageability, then how do we really define? So something is calculated and time-consuming and very often delaying of gratification, as stepping out and cheating on your spouse, hardly fits with the model of out-of-control compulsivity and powerlessness to do anything. I mean, part of my approach is often rather confrontive with patients. So I hear terms like overwhelmed or out of control, and I often can't help but challenge that. And I'd say to a patient, for example, you're sitting here in the office with me now. Why aren't you smoking crack?
Right.
You know, you told me
Yeah.
you can't stop smoking crack, but you came here and you're not smoking crack right now.
Right.
How are you able to control it to come here and talk to me?
Yeah.
And tell me while we're talking that you can't control it?
Right.
You obviously can control it. So this,
Yeah.
I'm not surprisingly a big fan of the late, great Albert Ellis, who was huge. I could never get away with that level of confrontation. I mean, he would curse out his patients and yell and get this cranky, curmudgeon-y old guy. But it works. And I'd like to see more of it in inpatient drug treatment as well.
So more
Different-
confrontational.
But different. I don't like the old therapeutic community relics that are prominent in a lot of adolescent treatment now. I'm sorry, I don't mean to spend the whole time complaining about what's wrong with addiction treatment. I want to
Tell us what's good about it.
What's right about a sexological approach.
Yeah.
See, again, the industry grabbed a hold with all the sex scandals in the industry, and really Patrick Carnes kind of created the cottage industry in the 80s with his book Out of the Shadows. And the addiction treatment industry just kind of went, well, you know, we got that. It's an addiction. We treat addiction, so we'll just bring it into the fold. And unfortunately, too many of those folks are not sexologists.
Yeah.
They're not trained in dealing with sexuality issues and don't really have a thorough understanding of the breadth of normal potential for normal human expression that can be sometimes changed, sometimes modified, sometimes brought to a healthier perspective in many, many ways other than the kind of rigid abstinence model typical of addiction treatment. So you mentioned SLAA. I have to tell you that at last check there were no less than 5 12-step groups related to the same issue.
Yeah.
There's Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics, Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and another which escapes me, but they don't even define sobriety the same way.
Yeah. You know, I'm a big fan of the whole 12-step, you know, and to hear that there's 5 different ones, that's great. Because, you know, a lot of people...
I don't know how great it is if it confuses ultimately what the disease or what the issue, what the condition, what the diagnosis is. I have to mention also before you break that it's the elephant in the room when the discussion comes up that addiction there is no such diagnosis. Clinically, it does not exist. It's defined rather arbitrarily.
And let's talk about that when we come right back.
Thanks.
Life Addictions, the recovery program, has been under development for over 3 years. It's personal, portable, and more importantly, it works. My motivation to start this business was to help people with addictions, to literally help save lives.
We're best known for our delivery system. It's called the Recovery Pod, embedded with life-saving audio. Just open it up, turn it on, and hit play.
Along with your Recovery Pod, you get a 4-page laminated follow-along guide. What sets us apart from our competition is our message. It's uplifting, inspiring, and to the point.
My name is John Laus, the creator and developer of Life Addictions, the recovery program. Our model of recovery starts with clarity. Clarity from the minute you wake up and open your eyes. Knowledge and know-how. Know-how are the things that motivate a person to change and take action, like your health, your family, a life that works, and a life with a purpose. Life Addictions, the recovery program. Visit us at our website at lifeaddictions.com. Welcome back to Life Addictions, the Recovery and Prevention Show. My name is John Laus. As you know, I'm a certified recovery specialist, and Richard Siegel, or Ricky, is here with us. He's a Florida board-certified sex therapist. Ricky, welcome back. And we were talking about something that you just brought up about addiction. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. First, thank you for letting me vent. I'm coming into your turf and I don't mean to slam your industry, your profession. I have been a part of it for well over 20 years.
And you still are in a big sense.
Absolutely. I certainly do feel that way, especially in terms of the treatment and prevention angles, though I may come at them from a different perspective. I also want to put in a plug for an organization very near and dear to my heart called ASECT. I'm also certified by ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, which does set the bar for certification in the other, especially in the other 49 states where there is no law, where basically folks can be a sex therapist when they say they are. And the field itself struggles with a lot of, kind of self-proclaimed experts and coaches and loveologists out there, and all kinds of sexperts, and Barbara Streisand and Meet the Fockers is still unfortunately what a lot of people think sex therapists are. So we were talking about this concept of addiction as the diagnosis, and you'd mentioned previously at the top that it may be more helpful to consider behaviors as symptoms and get further into a differential diagnosis. Certainly acceptable language, such as in the DSM, the ICD-9, the International Diagnostic Language for Medical and Mental Health Professionals, which are really established so that everyone is speaking the same language. I know there's a lot of contentious campaigning for the committees that are now working on the DSM-5, which should be out in about, 3-4 years, something like that, where the debate in the sexual dysfunctions and disorders category, there's consideration of adding a hypersexuality diagnosis. Now, the sex addiction industry is kind of really actively campaigning for this, with the belief that they will be able to say, finally, psychiatry and psychology have caught up to what we've known all along, that this is a legitimate diagnosis, and then they can diagnose hypersexual desire disorder and call it, sex addiction outside of clinical settings, in the media, and bring it kind of legitimacy. The brain science, again, I have to say, is a little bit of a flawed premise in terms of looking at brain scan imagery and saying if this is the brain scan of somebody smoking crack and these areas of the brain are lit up, and this is the brain scan of somebody looking at online porn and the same parts of the brain. Just to be absurd for one more moment, and I promise I'm going to get to a kind of a sexological treatment model. But if I'm into skiing, it's a dangerous activity. I know I could hurt myself. I could die hurtling down a mountain on sticks, and I could really obsess a lot about, I save up my money, go away for a ski weekend, and risk my life knowing the consequences, but do it anyway because I love that thrill. I love that pleasure. I get off on it. And I go home and go back to work, and I'm thinking, all I can think about is the mountain and being back there. So I think, you know what, I got some sick time in the bank. I'm gonna call my boss, go, hello, I'm not feeling well, and go back up the mountain. Right? But the boss calls on the cell phone and hears the screaming and the merriment of
So you're relating this
and I get fired, right? And I lose my job, and then my wife gets pissed and says, well, screw you, and takes the kids and leaves. So my life could be in havoc because of my, would you label me a skiing addict? Would I have to go to Skiers Anonymous meetings? Would you send me to inpatient treatment? I would certainly want to get to the cause of why someone who lives that way has a difficulty putting pleasure and reward and satisfaction in a healthy person's box. Every addiction is ultimately a pleasure-seeking behavior, isn't it?
Richard, we are so out of time. We've got so much more to cover. We got to have you back.
I would love it.
We got to have you back.
Continue the conversation.
Richard Siegel, board certified sex therapist. Thank you so much.
To be continued, I hope.
To be continued.
Thanks.
We'll see you later.